Hi everybody, Chip Phillips here with a quick Photoshop tip on how to add a little bit of shadow detail to just specific portions of an image. I'll show you two easy, simple, quick ways of doing this that I like to use a lot. So let's say I wanted to paint a little bit of shadow detail just into this little tree area and not have it affect anything else in the image. My first step is going to be to duplicate the background layer. And we can name it shadow detail if we want. The next step is going to be to go in and select the image adjustments shadow highlights. And then with this dialog up, I'm just going to be looking at this tree area. And I think the settings I have right now that came up are pretty good. I could kind of tweak them a little bit, sort of see where, and I might want to bring it out just a little bit beyond what I think looks good, because we can always adjust the opacity later. So I'm just going to kind of rock this tone back and forth a little bit. I don't want to crank that up too high. And then the radius, I don't want that up too high either, because it creates sort of a weird contrasty look. So I think, yeah, I'm going to keep it my settings right around here, 10, tone 28, radius 6. And then highlights, I want all the way down because we're just dealing with shadows. So let's click OK. And then overall, I think it looks pretty terrible. It's brought out a lot of the green in the grass. There's before, there's after. So I just want to isolate it to just the tree area. So let's mask this out. So I'm going to go and hold down the Alt key and click on this mask icon here, and that's going to give me a black layer mask completely hiding this adjustment. So the next step is to make sure our foreground color right here is set to white. If it's on black, we can get it to white by just hitting X or clicking on this little arrow right here. And then with a brush, soft brush, and an opacity, maybe a good starting point might be 50. You can zoom in a touch and then just paint a little bit of that detail back in there. And I'm trying to be careful not to bleed over into the lighter areas here, because it might create some weird halos. And I could zoom in even farther, and you can see it's bringing out these tree trunks a little bit too, which is kind of cool. Up in there. And that's basically all there is to it. And then if I wanted, I could hit this little tree right here, a touch, and I could paint in more by turning up the opacity, or I could have the effect be less by turning down the opacity of this layer. So here's before that adjustment, and here is after, and then cranking down the opacity a little to blend it in, maybe to about 80. And I think it looks good. So there's before, there's after. So that's one thing I'll use a lot of times if I just want to bring out a little bit of detail in some shadow areas. Another method that I use is, first step, duplicate background layer. Name it shadow detail. And then this time I'm going to go into the filter, camera raw filter. And this basically brings up the Camera Raw software, and you can pretty much, well, you can do everything that you can do in Camera Raw. Now you can do in Photoshop on a layer. So for this particular adjustment, the only thing I'm going to use is the shadow slider. So I'm just going to pull this up. I'm kind of looking at this little shadow area in here, and I'm going to crank it up quite a bit, because we can always adjust that opacity later and paint it in with a lower opacity. So let's go to about 67 plus 67, click OK. And once again, it looks very similar to the other adjustment overall, pretty terrible. So let's go and mask that out. Alt, click on that little mask icon there, and that completely hides the adjustment. So now what we want to do is, with the foreground color to white, grab a soft brush, same opacity I think is good, and just work it in like we did before. So the results to me look pretty similar. Paint it in a little little bit. I could zoom in and be more careful, but I think it's looking pretty good. So there is before the adjustment, and there's after. And once again, if it's too much, crank down that opacity. So there you have it, a couple of quick, easy ways to bring in some shadow detail in some of the darker areas within your images to balance out the tonality. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thanks so much for the support.